Let's start by talking about what GMO stands for. According to the Non-GMO Project, genetically modified organisms, or GMOs, are living organisms whose genetic material has been artificially manipulated in a laboratory through genetic engineering. This creates combinations of plant, animal, bacteria, and virus genes that do not occur in nature or through traditional crossbreeding methods. Now, Rai is going to tell us more about some of the statistics behind GMOs.
By the Food Policy Institute at Rutgers University found that U.S. consumers as a whole were fairly unknowledgeable about GMOs, with just 48% knowing that GMOs were sold at supermarkets and only 31% believing that they had most likely consumed a GMO product. This can be problematic in that misconceptions start to form. This goes hand in hand with the limited research on the long-term effects about GMOs. People are more likely to make assumptions or form biased opinions when there isn't much research. It is important for patients and people to do their research regarding the information we have now on GMOs. A common misconception is that can an increase in celiac disease be attributed to an increase in the gluten content of wheat as a consequence of wheat breeding. However, the results do not support the likelihood that wheat breeding has increased the protein content of wheat in the United States. Possible roles for change in the per capita consumption of wheat flour and the use of vital gluten as a food additive is what is being discussed now. Another interesting fact about GMOs is that we do not have the long-term effects. So there isn't data to support whether they are harmful or not if used over several years. Interestingly enough, according to the Non-GMO Project, many people are now choosing to opt out of the GMO research because of these possible long-term harms. A fun fact about GMOs: because GMOs are novel life forms, biotechnology companies have been able to obtain patents to control the use and distribution of their genetically engineered seeds. As a result, the companies that make GMOs now have the power to sue farmers whose fields have been contaminated with GMOs, even when it is the result of the drift of pollen from neighboring fields. History and some statistics behind GMOs. In a research done by Harvard, there was an enormous breakthrough in GMO technology in 1973 when Boyer and Cohen worked together to engineer the first successful genetically engineered organism. Together, they were able to transfer a gene that encodes antibiotic resistance from one strain of bacteria into another. Later in 1982, we get the first FDA-approved pharmaceutical insulin. GMOs have been available for consumer purchase since the 1990s. For the United States, they were first introduced to food markets in 1994 with the product's Flavor Savor tomato, which allowed this product to have a longer shelf life. Back when GMOs were introduced into the market in the 1990s, the federal government didn't require a label if a food product contained an ingredient that had been genetically modified. The United States regulating agencies determined that there were no notable differences in nutrition and food safety from other foods we eat that would require special labeling. But people did not like this idea and wanted more information on what they were eating. A bill was passed in 2016 requiring food manufacturers to use one of three types of labels to inform consumers when GMO ingredients are in their products. The three labels include a statement on the package, directions to a website, or a phone number or a QR code. And some statistics behind GMOs. USDA surveys have shown that GMO use has drastically increased over the past years. In 2001, herbicide-tolerant seed use went from 17% in 1997 to 94% in 2004. Also, herbicide-tolerant cotton acreage went from 10% in 1997 to 91% in 2014. The USDA survey also found that in 2018, 91% of domestic corn is grown with this herbicide-tolerant seeds.
So now that you guys know a little bit about genetically modified organisms, you may be wondering,
should I be eating genetically modified foods?
or what will genetically modified foods do to my health?
Well, the answer to those questions is kind of tricky. So let's start by looking at two problems.
Overconsumption in the developed world and undernourishment in less developed countries are both problems that require a modified food supply, and the tools of biotechnology have a part to play. Worldwide, plant-based products comprise the vast majority of human food intake, regardless of location or financial status. In some cultures, plant-based nutrition actually comprises 100% of the diet. So it's expected that nutritional improvement can be achieved with modifications of these staple crops. Protein energy malnutrition is the most lethal form of malnutrition according to the Food and Agriculture Organization of 2006, and it affects every fourth child worldwide. They estimate that 850 million people worldwide suffer from undernutrition, to which insufficient protein in the diet is a significant contributing factor. Most plants have a poor balance of essential amino acids relative to the needs of animals and humans. So for instance, cereals like maize, wheat, and rice, and legumes such as soybeans and peas are often low in certain amino acids. Therefore, consumption of foods made from these types of genetically modified crops potentially can help to prevent malnutrition in developing countries, especially among children. According to an article by Martina Newell McLaughlin, fiber type and quantity are undoubtedly under genetic control. Although this topic has been little studied, the technology to manipulate fiber content and type by genetic engineering would be a great benefit to the health status of many individuals who refuse, for taste or other reasons, to include adequate amounts of fiber in their daily diet. So for example, fiber content could be added to more preferred foods, or the more common sources of dietary fiber could be altered for greater health benefits. Genetic modification of oilseed crops can provide an abundant, relatively inexpensive source of dietary fatty acids and wide-ranging health benefits. Production of such lipids in vegetable oil provides a convenient mechanism to deliver healthier products to consumers without the requirement for significant dietary changes. GM technology is also trying to address vitamin A deficiency that leads to macular degeneration and affects development. So as many of you may or may not have heard of, there is this thing called golden rice. So golden rice is a genetically modified rice that contains beta-carotene, which is a source of vitamin A, and iron. Golden rice is directed toward developing countries with deficiencies in these nutrients because, as I said previously, it causes childhood blindness and anemia. And in most of these developing countries, rice is a dietary staple, and therefore golden rice could potentially help reduce these nutrient deficiencies. So genetically modified foods are also trying to reduce or limit food allergens, malabsorption, and food intolerances, and toxins in crop plants, and undesirable aesthetics such as caffeine. Examples include changing the levels of expression of a certain gene in the foods to reduce the intolerance effects of wheat and other cereals.
Non-GMO?
The Non-GMO Project is a non-profit organization committed to preserving and building sources of non-GMO products, educating consumers, and providing verified non-GMO choices. So you may have seen a lot of their labels, like you saw in the video previously with Taylor, that signify whether or not a food is non-GMO. The Non-GMO Project has made an entire pamphlet, basically, of myths and truths. So I'm going to address some of those myths and truths with you today. The first myth is that independent studies confirm that genetically modified foods and crops are safe. The truth is, independent research on genetically modified foods is difficult or impossible to carry out, but many studies that have been carried out find problems. In-depth food safety studies on genetically modified crops and foods carried out by scientists independent of the GMO industry are scarce. They are hampered by the difficulty of accessing genetically modified seeds and the non-GM parent varieties from the developer companies. Those scientists who have managed to carry out such research have found risks from the genetically modified organisms tested. Myth number 2. Genetically modified foods are safe to eat. Well, the truth is, studies show that genetically modified foods can be toxic, allergenic, or have unintended nutritional changes. Peer-reviewed studies have found that, like I said, genetically modified foods can have unintended toxic and allergenic effects and altered nutritional value. Such effects have even found in industry's own studies carried out in support of regulatory authorization. Most animal feeding studies on GMOs are short-term or medium-term in length, too short to show long-term chronic effects such as organ failure, cancer, or reproductive problems. What is needed are long-term and multi-generational studies on GMOs to see if the signs of toxicity, commonly reported in shorter studies, develop into serious disease. But such studies are not required by government regulators anywhere in the world. And lastly, the last myth we have is that genetically modified foods are rigorously assessed for their ability to cause allergic reactions. Sorry guys, no thorough allergenicity assessment is conducted on genetically modified foods. The public is told that genetically modified foods are no more likely to cause allergic reactions than non-GMO foods, and that they are fully assessed for allergenicity. But this is untrue. Genetic engineering can create novel proteins that have no history of a safe use in food, raising the potential for allergic reactions. Most food allergies are caused by a reaction to a protein in a food. So the DNA of an organism contains instructions for making for making protein. Genetic engineering changes the DNA of a food, and the altered DNA can in turn create new proteins. GM foods could create new allergies in 2 ways. The new proteins could cause allergic reactions or be allergens themselves, or the new proteins could sensitize people to existing food proteins.
As future healthcare providers, it will be our job to advocate for wellness, which means being confident in the knowledge that we have surrounding medicine, nutrition, holistic care, and so much more that can benefit our future patient. One of the ways that we can begin to prepare for this role is to build our knowledge and understanding of the application of current medical controversies, one of which is GMOs. There's a multitude of conversations being had regarding the health effects of GMOs in patients' diets, a few of which we will discuss now so that you can begin to have insight for potential future conversations with patients. One of the most pressing of the controversies regarding GMOs and patient care is the concern of allergens. According to research, genetically modified soy and corn each contain 2 new proteins with allergenic properties. The extent of research around these 2 new proteins is minimal, which puts patients at risk of adverse effects without much research to help understand their reaction. Similarly, genetically modified soy has up to 7 times more trypsin inhibitor, a known soy allergen. And skin prick tests show some people react to genetically modified soy, but not to the non-GM soy. Soon after genetically modified soy was introduced to the United Kingdom, soy allergens skyrocketed by 50%. With soy being one of the top 10 most common food allergies in the United States, this research believes that the increase in genetically modified soy products in the U.S. diet is a major contributor to the allergen and asthma epidemic in the United States. Additionally, genetically modified foods rely on gene transfers between different organisms, which contaminate the new food with potential allergenic properties from the other food. One of the main ways that this can help us as future healthcare providers is that we can use this information to be aware of patients with known food allergens, as well as know that this could be a potential factor in the causation of certain food allergy symptoms. Many providers with such clients are now asking their patients to track their food intake, trying to recognize when and what type of GMO they are consuming. Antibiotic resistance is something that nearly every healthcare provider in the United States is having to navigate in some form or another. The introduction of GMOs into people's diet is an area of new research that is beginning to show a link to the alarming rates of antibiotic-resistant bacteria. GMOs are altered in ways that can lead to them containing antibiotic-resistant properties, which when introduced to the body through consumption, will continue to have those effects. For example, transgenic tomatoes carry a gene that is resistant to the antibiotic kanamycin, which is used to treat TB. Although tomatoes are not typically one of the most consumed foods by patients and can often be overlooked as a source of adverse effects due to it being a GMO, this is an important application of the effects of GMOs in the healthcare field and gives insight regarding the rise of antibiotic resistance, which is ultimately taking the lives of many patients. One of the agricultural effects of GMOs that impacts healthcare is the increased use of pesticides, especially Roundup. Roundup contains elevated levels of phytoestrogens, which are similar hormones to estrogen. A higher level of these hormones has been linked to breast cancer in women. As healthcare providers, we can use this information to potentially suggest non-GMO diets to women and men who are at higher risk for breast cancer. Finally, as nurses and other healthcare providers, it is important to highlight to patients that the introduction of GMOs into our food and medical industry has provided many positives. Many people may present with debilitating fear or anxiety regarding GMOs, and the ability to highlight some of these advances it has brought could help them. In fact, the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine put out a report in 2016 that stated the committee found no differences that implicate a higher health risk from genetically engineered foods than from their non-genetically engineered counterparts. With that, important and helpful advances in patient care have come from GMO. For example, the recombinant hepatitis B vaccine originates from genetically modified baker's yeast. Also, injectable insulin is produced from genetically modified E. coli bacteria. These topics presented just scratch the surface of the possible conversations that we will have or be presented with in our future careers. It is important that we take it upon ourselves to be informed about up-to-date research regarding GMOs, as well as have a basis of information to which we can make informed decisions for our patients' health.
You might be wondering, how will I utilize this information on GMOs in my career as a nurse or healthcare professional? Well, there are plenty of ways that knowledge of GMOs could possibly tie into our future careers as nurses or other types of healthcare providers. Nurses play roles as care providers, educators, advocates, managers, collaborators, leaders, and nurse researchers. There are various different roles that a nurse can play, and knowledge of GMOs could affect all of these roles in different ways. I would like to talk more about how knowledge of GMOs can affect each of these roles. One way that this topic may play into our roles is through patient education. For example, if I'm having a conversation with a patient about nutrition, they might ask, "What do you know about GMOs?" Or, "Are GMOs safe?" As healthcare professionals, it will be important to have the ability to articulate the risks as well as the potential benefits associated with GMOs. It is also important to be able to refer clients to sources of accurate and trustworthy information on GMOs, since this is a topic of ongoing research.
I'm here with Devin, and the question I have for her is, Devin, how do you plan to utilize information on GMOs in your future career as a healthcare professional?
So after grad school, I want to become a pediatrician, and I would utilize more information coming out about GMOs. For example, if they had negative effects on like the human body, I would be sure to warn parents about the adverse and negative effects that it would have on the human body, so that it would in turn not affect their children if they chose to raise them in a GMO-free family.
Nice.
GMOs have the potential to affect aspects of our careers as healthcare professionals beyond patient care and education. Because we do not yet know the long-term effects of GMOs, this will continue to be an area of research and study. This means two things. Firstly, it means that it will be important for us to stay informed about the latest research concerning GMOs as our careers progress. Secondly, as nurse researchers or other types of healthcare professionals, we could have the opportunity to participate in doing research on GMOs as their long-term effects on the human body are discovered. As nurses who have the potential to be involved in research, it may also be important to remember the ethical challenges that may come along with research that is conducted on GMOs, as well as our duty to advocate for the safety of our patients. Longitudinal studies are attempting to discover the long-term effects of GMOs on people, and it is easy to see how it could become an ethical challenge to study the possibly harmful effects of GMOs on patients. Knowledge of the risks and benefits of GMOs may affect the information that we provide to patients, and therefore affect the role of the nurse as educator. GMOs also affect the role that nurses play in research and as advocates for the ethical treatment of patients within research. There are many other examples of roles and aspects of nursing that may be affected by knowledge of GMOs. Knowledge in this area could also impact the way that we collaborate with other nurses to share new information as it comes about. After discussing this question as a group, we felt that the contribution of GMOs to human health could be potentially positive and negative. Because the long-term effects of GMOs are not yet known, it is difficult to label them as either positive or negative, good or bad, in terms of their long-term consequences. Changing the nutritional content of a food item could be potentially helpful if people could consume more benefits as a result. However, the negative effects are not yet known. Overall, we are excited as a group to continue to track the evidence-based research that will continue to emerge surrounding GMOs in order to provide the best education and care possible for our patients. Thank you so much for watching our video on genetically modified organisms. We hope that you learned a little bit more about what a GMO is, as well as how it affects individuals, communities, some of the research and statistics surrounding GMOs, and how it could potentially affect your future career as a nurse or other type of healthcare provider. Thank you.